My name is Fatima Al-Rahman. I was a murderer who wore a white coat instead of a mask. I killed not in dark alleys but in sterile hospital rooms. I ended lives not with bullets but with medications, not with violence but with what everyone believed was mercy and healing. And I did it all believing I was serving Allah. There are some secrets that hospitals keep in their halls that no medical textbook will ever record. Some hands that heal by day become instruments of death by night, and sometimes the person you trust most with your life is the one planning to take it. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about good and evil, about redemption and justice, about whether someone can come back from becoming a monster. Stay with me because this story will disturb you, break you, and maybe, just maybe, heal something inside you that you didn't know was wounded. Before I begin, I want you to do something for me. Comment your location and let's stand together. I was 29 years old when my world collapsed, when everything I believed shattered like glass, when I discovered that the person I thought was righteous was actually the villain in every story I'd ever been part of. I grew up in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in a family that most people would have called devout. From the time I was a small girl, I heard the same messages repeated like prayers, that unbelievers were a disease on this earth, that Christians and Jews were the greatest enemies of Allah, that killing them was not murder but justice, not sin but righteousness. My father told me that paradise had levels, and the highest levels were reserved for those who fought for Islam. He explained that jihad didn't always mean carrying weapons in obvious ways. He said that sometimes the greatest warriors were those who fought from positions no one would suspect. He told me that if I became a doctor, I could serve Allah in ways that others couldn't imagine. I believed him, every word. I studied hard, earned top marks, got accepted into medical school at University Malaya. I took the Hippocratic Oath with my classmates, promising to do no harm, to treat all patients with equal care, to preserve life above all else. I spoke those words with my mouth while my heart held completely different intentions. To me, that oath applied only to Muslims. Christians and other infidels didn't deserve the same protections. They were enemies, and in war you didn't heal your enemies. You eliminated them. After I completed my residency, I started working at one of the major government hospitals in Kuala Lumpur. That's where I met them, the others like me. Dr. Hassan introduced me during my second week. He told me about a group of Muslim healthcare workers who met regularly, who shared a common understanding of our true purpose in the medical field. The first meeting shocked me, not because of what they were doing but because I'd found my people, others who understood. There were 6 of us initially. 3 doctors, 2 nurses, and a pharmacist. We met in Dr. Hassan's apartment once a month. We shared meals, prayed together, and then we talked about our work. Dr. Hassan opened that first meeting by asking each person to share their recent victories. I listened as a nurse named Aisha described how she'd deliberately given wrong medication to a Christian patient recovering from surgery. She told us how the patient had developed complications and died within 48 hours. She smiled as she said this, and everyone else nodded with approval. A doctor named Kareem shared how he'd misdiagnosed a Christian businessman, sending him home with painkillers when the man actually had appendicitis. The man died from a ruptured appendix 3 days later. They went around the circle sharing stories of Christians who died under their care. Wrong medications, deliberate overdoses, treatments withheld, diagnostic errors that weren't errors at all. Each story ended the same way, with death, and with the group celebrating another victory for Islam. When it came to my turn, I felt embarrassed that I had nothing to share yet. But Dr. Hassan placed his hand on my shoulder and told me not to worry. He said that Allah had brought me to them for a purpose, and soon I would have my own victories to report. He explained that what we were doing was true jihad, that we were fighting on the front lines of a war most Muslims didn't even know was happening. He reminded us that the Prophet himself had commanded believers to fight against unbelievers, and that our method was simply more sophisticated than previous generations. I went home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. I had found my calling. I would be a warrior for Islam, and no one would ever suspect the young female doctor with a kind smile and gentle hands. My first victim came 2 weeks later. Her name was Sarah Tan. She was a 34-year-old marketing executive at a multinational company. She'd come in for a routine gallbladder surgery, something we performed dozens of times each month without complications. She was Christian. I saw the small cross necklace she wore. Heard her thank Jesus when I told her the procedure would be straightforward. That cross made my decision easy. After her surgery, I was assigned to manage her post-operative care. Everything had gone smoothly during the procedure. She should have recovered normally and gone home within 3 days. But I adjusted her medication dosage, increasing her pain medication to levels that I knew would suppress her respiratory system. I did it gradually over the course of 18 hours so it would look like a natural complication. I was in the room when she died. I watched her oxygen levels drop, watched her breathing become shallow, watched the monitor flatlines. The attending physician rushed in, tried to resuscitate her, but it was too late. He turned to me with confusion in his eyes and asked what had happened. I told him I didn't know, that she'd seemed fine, that perhaps she'd had an undetected underlying condition. Her husband arrived an hour later. He collapsed when we told him his wife was gone. He kept asking how this could happen, saying she'd only come in for a simple procedure, saying she'd texted him that morning telling him she felt fine. I stood there in my white coat, my face arranged in professional sympathy, and told him that sometimes complications arose that no one could predict. I told him we'd done everything we could. Felt no guilt. None at all. Instead, I felt satisfaction. I'd struck a blow for Islam. I'd removed one more Christian from the earth. That night, I performed my prayers with extra devotion. I thanked Allah for allowing me to serve him. I asked for more opportunities. At the next meeting of our group, I shared my story. They celebrated with me. Dr. Hassan told me I'd done well, that Allah was pleased. Aisha hugged me and told me I was a true sister in jihad. We prayed together, asking Allah to give us more chances to fight his battles. The killing became easier after that. My second victim was a contractor named Michael who came in for a routine health screening. He was in his 40s, healthy, with nothing wrong except slightly elevated cholesterol. He mentioned during his examination that he attended a charismatic church downtown. He showed me photos on his phone of his church's recent mission trip to Indonesia. I prescribed him medication that I told him would help with his cholesterol. Actually, I gave him drugs that would create blood clots in his system. I told him to take them daily. He trusted me completely, thanked me for taking such good care of him. 2 weeks later, I heard from a colleague that he died at home from a sudden pulmonary embolism. His death was ruled natural causes. No one suspected anything. After Michael, I killed a businessman named Peter. Then a teacher named Ruth. Then an elderly man named Thomas. Each death was carefully planned. Each one looked like natural causes or unfortunate complications. I varied my methods. Overdoses, wrong medications, fatal drug interactions, treatments withheld until it was too late. I stopped counting after my 12th victim. It became routine, just part of my job. I'd see a patient, notice signs of their Christian faith, and begin planning their death. A cross necklace, a Bible in their bag, church bulletin, prayer before treatment. Any sign was enough. Our group grew. By my second year at the hospital, we had 11 members. We moved our meetings to different locations to avoid suspicion. We developed sophisticated methods, sharing techniques for killing patients in ways that would never be detected. We coached each other on how to falsify records, how to deflect questions, how to appear devastated when patients died. Felt powerful. Felt righteous. I felt like I was doing exactly what Allah had created me to do. Every time I administered poison, every time I heard that another Christian patient had died, I whispered Allahu Akbar in my heart. God is greatest. God is greatest. I was serving the greatest by eliminating his enemies. My family was proud of me, though they didn't know the full extent of my work. My father told his congregation about his daughter, the doctor who was serving the community. My brothers told me they wished they could fight for Islam as effectively as I was. My mother would stroke my hair and tell me I was her precious daughter, her gift from Allah. I was 29 years old. I'd been a doctor for 4 years. I killed at least 40 people, probably more. I slept peacefully every night. I had no nightmares, no doubts, no guilt. I believed with every fiber of my being that I was righteous, that I was holy, that paradise awaited me. Then Grace Okonkwo was admitted to my ward. It was a Tuesday evening in March. I was ending my shift when the admission came through. A 12-year-old girl with severe pneumonia, needing immediate treatment and monitoring. I took the case because the pediatric specialist had already gone home, and someone needed to get the girl stabilized. I walked into the examination room and saw her. Small for her age, her dark skin glistening with fever sweat, her breathing labored and painful. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering encouragement to her. The mother looked up when I entered, and I saw the fear and hope mixed in her eyes. Her mother introduced herself as Rebecca Okonkwo. She explained that they'd moved to Malaysia from Nigeria 2 years ago after her husband had been killed by Islamic extremists. She told me that her husband had been a medical missionary who'd treated both Muslims and Christians without discrimination. She said that extremists had attacked the clinic where he worked, and he died trying to protect his patients and staff. She told me all of this while tears ran down her cheeks. Then she looked at me with such trust and said that she was grateful her daughter had me as her doctor. She told me that Grace wanted to become a nurse when she grew up, that before her father died, the two of them would play pretend at home. Him wearing a doctor's coat, Grace wearing a nurse's uniform, both of them practicing how to save lives. Rebecca told me that Grace was everything she had left in this world. She said that she'd lost her husband to hatred and violence, and she couldn't bear to lose her daughter too. She asked me to please take good care of Grace, to please help her baby girl get better. I looked down at Grace. The girl's eyes were half closed, but she managed a small smile when she saw me. She tried to speak but couldn't because of her labored breathing. Her mother told me that Grace had been asking about whether there would be kind doctors at the hospital, and now Rebecca could tell her yes. I smiled at them both. I told Rebecca that her daughter was in good hands, that pneumonia was serious but treatable, that with proper antibiotics and monitoring, Grace should recover fully. I explained the treatment plan, told them we'd admit Grace for at least 3 days of observation, and reassured them that everything would be fine. Rebecca thanked me over and over. She told me I was an answer to her prayers. She said that God had blessed her by bringing Grace to me. I walked out of that room with my mind already made up. Another infidel child would not grow up. Another Christian family would learn the price of rejecting Islam. The fact that this woman's husband had already been killed by my Muslim brothers only made my decision feel more justified. Clearly this family was cursed by Allah for their rejection of true faith. I admitted Grace to the ward, set up her 4, and began the standard pneumonia protocol. But that evening, after Rebecca had fallen asleep in the chair beside Grace's bed, I prepared a different medication. I added it to Grace's 4-drip, a drug that would cause her organs to fail gradually over the next 24 hours. It was one of my preferred methods because it worked slowly enough that no one would suspect foul play. Grace would seem to improve initially as the antibiotics fought the pneumonia. Then, around 18 to 24 hours after admission, she would suddenly decline. Her kidneys would start to fail. Her liver enzymes would spike. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it would be too late to save her. The death would be attributed to complications from the pneumonia, perhaps an undetected underlying condition. No one would question it. I finished my shift and went home. I performed my evening prayers with particular devotion that night. I thanked Allah for another opportunity to serve Him. I asked Him to accept this Christian child's death as a sacrifice for Islam. I went to bed feeling satisfied, peaceful, righteous. Fell asleep quickly. I dreamed about paradise, about the rewards waiting for me, about standing before Allah and hearing Him tell me I'd been a faithful servant. Then, at 2:47 in the morning, everything changed. I woke suddenly. My bedroom was filled with light, not harsh like a lamp, but somehow penetrating, exposing, revealing. I tried to move but found I couldn't. My body was paralyzed. A man stood at the foot of my bed. I knew immediately this wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination. This was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. The presence of this man filled my room, filled my awareness, filled everything. I couldn't look away from him. He spoke my name. Just my name. Fatima. Terror flooded through me. Not natural fear, but something deeper. The terror of a guilty person standing before a judge, of darkness suddenly exposed to light, of evil confronted by absolute goodness. He asked me a question, and his voice carried such grief that it cut through my paralysis. He asked me why I was persecuting him. He asked why I was killing his body. He asked me why, Fatima, why? I didn't understand the question. I managed to whisper my confusion, asking who he was. He told me. He said he was Jesus, the one I was persecuting. He explained that every time I killed one of his followers, I was killing him. Every time I poisoned a child who bore his name, I was poisoning him. Every time I celebrated their deaths, I was celebrating his crucifixion. Then he showed me. I saw them. All of them. Every single person I'd killed. But I didn't see them the way I'd seen them before. As faceless infidels, as enemies, as obstacles to paradise. I saw them as he saw them. As beloved children. As precious creations. As people with families and dreams and futures. I saw Sarah Tan, my first victim. But this time I also saw her 3 children at her funeral. I saw her husband trying to explain to a 5-year-old why mommy wasn't coming home. I saw those children growing up without their mother, scarred by a loss they didn't understand. I saw Michael the contractor. I saw his wife discovering his body in their bedroom. I saw his elderly parents at his funeral, broken by the loss of their son. I saw the mission trips he would never take, the people he would never help. I saw Peter. I saw Ruth. I saw Thomas. I saw all of them, every single one. And worse, I saw what Jesus showed me next. I saw myself in each death. I saw myself preparing the medications. I saw myself injecting poison into 4 bags. I saw myself falsifying records. I saw myself at our group meetings, smiling, celebrating, planning more murders. For the first time I saw myself clearly. Not as a holy warrior. Not as a servant of God. But as what I truly was. A monster. A demon wearing a doctor's coat. A murderer who'd twisted religion into justification for evil. The pride I'd felt transformed instantly into horror. The satisfaction became unbearable shame. Every victim's face was seared into my consciousness. Every death I'd caused played out in excruciating detail. I tried to look away but couldn't. I tried to close my eyes but they wouldn't close. I was being forced to witness the full weight of what I'd done. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain that I'd believed I was right, that I'd been taught this was righteous, that I'd thought I was serving God. But the words died before they could form. Because deep down, beneath all the religious language and justification, I'd known. I'd known that killing was wrong. I'd known that betraying patients who trusted me was evil. I'd known that murdering children was monstrous. I'd chosen to ignore that knowledge because hatred had been more comfortable than humanity. Then Jesus showed me something else. He showed me grace. I saw her in her hospital bed at that very moment. I saw the poison I'd put in her spreading through her small body. I saw her organs beginning to fail. I saw Rebecca sleeping in the chair beside her. Exhausted, trusting, believing her daughter was being healed when she was actually being murdered. Jesus told me that Grace was dying right now because of me. He told me that a 12-year-old child who wanted to heal people was being killed by someone who'd taken an oath to do no harm. He told me that Grace's father had already been murdered by Muslims, and now her Muslim doctor was murdering his daughter. Broke. I began to sob. Not quiet tears but violent body-shaking sobs. I heard sounds coming from my mouth that didn't sound human, sounds of pure anguish and horror. I tried to speak but could only gasp out fragments. What have I done? What have I become? How did I become this? God, what have I done? Jesus spoke again, but this time his voice was tender. He told me that he came to save me. He said even me. Even after everything I'd done. He explained that he died for me too, that his blood covered even my sins, that no one was beyond his reach. But then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said if I came to him, I would face persecution. He told me I would suffer for his sake as his people had suffered for mine. He said I would lose everything, my family, my career, my reputation, my safety, perhaps even my life. But he promised that if I lost everything for him, I would gain him. And he promised that he would be enough. Then he was gone. The light disappeared. I was alone in my dark bedroom, shaking, weeping, my mind screaming with the weight of what I'd done and what I'd seen. Grace was dying. Right now. 'Cause of me. I threw myself out of bed. My legs barely worked. I was shaking so violently I could hardly stand. I pulled on clothes, grabbed my car keys, and ran out of my apartment. I drove to the hospital like a madwoman, running red lights, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Tears blurred my vision. I kept seeing Grace's face, kept seeing Rebecca's trust, kept seeing all 40-plus victims whose lives I'd stolen. I reached the hospital at 3:15 in the morning. I ran through the empty corridors to Grace's ward. When I reached her room, I saw the monitors showing her vital signs deteriorating. My poison was working. Grace was pale, struggling to breathe, her small body fighting a battle it couldn't win. I ran to the medication room and began preparing the antidote, medications that might counteract what I'd done. But my hands were shaking so badly I kept dropping things. Tears streamed down my face. I was making mistakes, having to start over. Precious seconds ticking away while Grace died. I needed help. I found Dr. Hassan, the one who'd introduced me to the group, my mentor in murder. I grabbed his arm and begged him to help me save Grace. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. He told me to let the infidel die. He said this was what we did, this was our jihad, this was our purpose. He asked me if I'd forgotten everything. I screamed at him. I begged him. I told him we were wrong, that we weren't holy warriors but murderers, that we'd become the very evil we claimed to fight against. I pleaded with him to help me save this child. He looked at me with disgust. He told me I'd become one of them, that I was a traitor to Islam. Then he walked away, leaving me alone with my desperate attempt to undo what I'd done. I worked frantically, preparing medications, double-checking dosages even though my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I ran back to Grace's room and began administering the antidote through her pore. I adjusted her oxygen. I monitored her vitals obsessively. Rebecca woke up and saw me standing over Grace, saw my tears, saw my frantic activity. She asked what was happening, whether Grace was okay. I couldn't answer. I could only cry as I worked, checking monitors, adjusting medications, praying to a God I'd never actually prayed to before. Please, please, please. I didn't even know who I was begging, but I couldn't stop. Rebecca must have sensed something was desperately wrong, even if she didn't understand what. She fell to her knees beside her daughter's bed. She began to pray aloud, her voice breaking. Jesus, Jesus, please. Save my daughter. I don't understand what's happening, but you do. Please, Lord. Save Grace. Have mercy on us. Please don't take her from me. Jesus, help us. I worked through the night and into the next day. I barely left Grace's bedside. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I didn't rest. I just fought hour after hour to undo what I'd done. Other doctors and nurses came and went during their shifts. They asked me why I was still there, told me I should go home and rest. I made excuses, told them I wanted to monitor this case personally because of the severity. They accepted my explanations, never suspecting the truth. At one point around noon, I was so exhausted and despairing that I went to my office, locked the door and fell to my knees. For the first time in my life I prayed to Jesus. My prayer was simple and desperate. I don't know how to pray to you. I don't know if you'll hear me after what I've done. But please, please don't let Grace die. Punish me, but don't let her die. Let this child live. Please. I went back to Grace's room and continued my vigil. Rebecca never left either. She sat beside her daughter, holding her hand, praying constantly, singing worship songs in a tired, broken voice. Several times she thanked me for staying, for caring so much about Grace. Each word of gratitude was like a knife in my heart. At 2:45 in the afternoon, almost 12 hours after I'd started trying to save Grace, I was called urgently back to the room. I'd stepped out briefly to get more medication. When I ran back in, the monitors were going crazy. Alarms were blaring. Grace was crashing. Her heart rate was erratic, bouncing between too fast and too slow. Her breathing had become shallow, gasping. Her oxygen saturation was dropping rapidly. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone. Rebecca was screaming, calling her daughter's name over and over. She was begging Grace not to leave her, telling her to hold on, promising her that everything would be okay if she'd just hold on. I tried everything. I administered emergency medications, called for a crash cart. I did every intervention I knew. But nothing worked. Grace's body was shutting down. The poison had done too much damage. My attempts to reverse it had come too late. At 3:17 in the afternoon, Grace's heart stopped. The monitor emitted that single, sustained tone that every medical professional dreads. That sound that means death. Rebecca collapsed over her daughter's body. She was screaming, crying, begging God to bring Grace back. She kept saying she couldn't lose her daughter too, that she couldn't bear losing both her husband and her child, that she had nothing left if Grace was gone. I stood frozen at the foot of the bed, watching the scene I'd caused. Watching a mother's grief that I'd created. Watching a child's death that I'd engineered. Watching the consequences of my choices play out in real time. The attending physician came running. He tried to resuscitate Grace, but I knew it was pointless. The damage was too severe. After 15 minutes, he stopped and recorded the time of death. Rebecca's screams had turned into these broken, animal sounds of grief. Security had to help her stand. They tried to lead her out of the room, but she kept collapsing. She kept reaching for Grace's body. She kept begging God to wake her baby up. I staggered out of the room and made it to a supply closet before I vomited. Then I leaned against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor, my whole body shaking. Killed before. Killed dozens of times. But I'd never stayed to watch. I'd never seen the immediate aftermath. I'd never stood there while a mother discovered her child was dead and knew it was my fault. I somehow made it through the rest of my shift. I don't remember how. I just moved through motions, my mind blank, my body numb. When my shift finally ended, I went home, called in sick for the next day, and didn't leave my apartment. I stayed inside for 14 days. For 2 weeks, I was trapped in my apartment with my guilt. I didn't go to work. Barely ate. I couldn't sleep more than an hour or two at a time. When I did sleep, I had nightmares. All my victims appeared in my dreams. They surrounded my bed, just standing there looking at me, asking why. Why did you kill me? Why did you hate me so much? Why did you think you were righteous? Jesus appeared in my dreams every night. Sometimes he simply sat with me in the darkness, saying nothing, just present in my grief. Other times he spoke to me. One night, I screamed at him through my tears. I asked him why he took Grace, why he let her die when I tried to save her. I told him it wasn't fair that I'd tried, that I'd begged him for help. He answered gently that Grace died so I would feel the full weight of what I'd done. He explained that every mother I'd made childless had felt what Rebecca Okonkwo felt. Every child I'd orphaned had felt what Grace felt. He told me I needed to stand in that hospital room and face the consequences of my actions. Not to destroy me, but to break me open so he could remake me. I told him I couldn't live with this guilt, that I was a monster who didn't deserve to breathe. He corrected me tenderly. He said I was a monster, past tense. But he told me he makes all things new. He said he could make even me new, even after all I'd done. He told me that's what grace means. Undeserved favor, impossible mercy, love for the unlovable. On the 13th night, he gave me an instruction. He told me to go to Rebecca Okonkwo. He said I needed to confess what I'd done. He told me to ask her forgiveness. I argued with him. I told him Rebecca would have me arrested. I said I'd go to prison, maybe face execution. I told him I deserved to die. He agreed that I deserved to die. But he reminded me that he'd already died in my place. Then he commanded me again to go face what I'd done. On the 15th day, I returned to the hospital. I submitted my resignation letter, effective immediately. My supervisor was shocked, tried to convince me to stay, but I insisted. Then I asked administration for the Okonkwo family's contact information. They told me Rebecca was still in Malaysia, preparing to take her daughter's body back to the United States. They gave me her temporary address. I drove there in a daze. Every part of me wanted to run away. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. But I forced myself to park. Forced myself to walk to the door. Forced myself to knock. Rebecca opened the door. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She'd lost weight in the 2 weeks since Grace died. When she recognized me, confusion crossed her face. She asked why I was there. I asked if I could come in. My voice was shaking so badly I could hardly speak. We sat in her small living room. 2 large suitcases stood by the door, ready for her flight back to America. A framed photo of Grace sat on the coffee table. Grace smiling, vibrant, alive, full of the future she'd never have. I told Rebecca I needed to confess something. Then I started talking. I told her everything. About the group of Muslim healthcare workers. About our monthly meetings where we celebrated killing Christian patients. About the methods we used. About the dozens of people I'd murdered. About my belief that I was serving Allah, fighting jihad, earning paradise. Then I told her about Grace. That her death wasn't a tragic complication. That I'd deliberately poisoned her. That I'd planned to kill her from the moment I saw the cross Rebecca wore around her neck. That Grace died because I hated Christians and believed killing them was righteous. I told her about Jesus appearing to me. About how I tried to save Grace but failed. About standing in that room and watching her die and knowing it was my fault. By the time I finished, both of us were sobbing. I was on the floor, unable to even look at the woman whose daughter I'd murdered. I told her I deserved death, that I deserved hell, that I understood if she wanted to call the police right now. Rebecca was silent for a long time. I could hear her crying, hear her struggling to breathe through her grief. Then she spoke, her voice thick with tears. She told me that Jesus had spoken to her the day before. She said she didn't understand it at the time. He'd told her she needed to forgive. She thought maybe he was preparing her to forgive the illness that took Grace, or the hospital for not saving her. She said she didn't understand what Jesus meant until I walked through her door. Then she did something I will never understand, not if I live 1,000 years. She got down on the floor beside me. She took my hands in hers. And she told me she forgave me. She said she didn't forgive me because I deserved it. She was clear about that. I didn't deserve forgiveness, not from her, not from anyone. But she explained that Jesus had forgiven her when she didn't deserve it either. And she said Jesus was telling her that he had plans for me, that Grace's death would not be meaningless, that somehow God would bring redemption out of this horror. She helped me stand up. Then she told me there was someone I needed to meet. Rebecca took me to meet Pastor Samuel, a man who led an underground church and worked specifically with converts from Islam. We met in a small hidden space in a basement where believers gathered secretly, knowing that being discovered could mean violence, arrest, or death. Pastor Samuel listened to my whole story. Then he looked at me with tears in his eyes and told me that Jesus specializes in transforming murderers into missionaries. He reminded me that the Apostle Paul had killed Christians, truly believed he was serving God, and then met Jesus and became one of the greatest preachers of grace in history. That night, surrounded by people who'd lost everything to follow Jesus, I confessed my sins and accepted Christ. Pastor Samuel baptized me in a metal tub in that basement. As I went under the water, I felt the weight of my guilt wash over me again. But when I came up, something had shifted. The weight wasn't gone. I knew I'd carry it forever, but But I felt something I'd never felt before. Oh, the possibility that somehow, someway, God could use even someone like me. I went home that night and wrote a letter to my family. I explained my conversion. I told them I'd accepted Christ. I said I was sorry for the pain this would cause them, but I couldn't deny what I'd experienced. I left the letter on the kitchen table with my apartment keys beside it. I packed a single bag with clothes and my few important documents. Then I walked out knowing I could never go back. When my father found my letter the next morning, his response was immediate. He declared me an apostate. He told the mosque that I'd betrayed Islam. My brothers publicly vowed to kill me themselves to restore the family's honor. Within 48 hours, my photograph was circulating in extremist networks throughout Malaysia with a price on my head. The hospital launched a full investigation into patient deaths that had occurred under my care. My confession to Rebecca, which she'd courageously reported to the police despite knowing it might put me in danger, triggered criminal charges. An international warrant was issued for my arrest. Became a fugitive. The underground church network moved me to safe houses, never staying more than a few days in each location. I lived in constant fear. Every sound at night could be my brother's. Every stranger could be someone collecting the bounty. Every police car could mean arrest and imprisonment. But despite the danger, I found Pastor Samuel again. He connected me with an underground missionary organization that worked in the most dangerous places. Villages where Christians were hunted, regions where missionaries were regularly killed, areas where simply being Christian meant risking death. I told them I wanted to serve. They tried to talk me out of it, explaining the dangers. I told them I understood danger better than most. I'd been the danger. Now I wanted to be on the other side. They sent me first to a village in Indonesia where believers were being persecuted by radical Islamic groups. My job was to provide medical care and share the gospel. I worked with Indonesian Christians who risked their lives daily to follow Jesus. The persecution started immediately. When local Muslims discovered a former Muslim doctor was treating Christians, word spread quickly. One night, a mob surrounded the small clinic where I was working. They threw stones at the building. They chanted death threats. They demanded I come out so they could punish me for apostasy. The local Christians hid me in a secret room beneath the clinic. I stayed there for 3 days while the mob outside screamed for my death. I could hear them throwing things, breaking windows, threatening to burn the building down. For 3 days I didn't see sunlight. Barely ate. I prayed constantly, terrified, asking Jesus if this was how I would die. On the 3rd night, the mob dispersed after police finally intervened. But I'd learned my first lesson in persecution, that following Jesus means losing safety, comfort, and control. My second assignment was in Pakistan. I worked in a small underground clinic treating believers who couldn't go to public hospitals because of discrimination. One afternoon, religious police raided our Continue 9:20 AM clinic. They arrested me and 3 other workers. They took us to a detention center. For 5 days I was interrogated. They wanted names of other converts. They wanted information about the underground church. They wanted me to renounce Christ and return to Islam. When I refused, the beatings started. I was hit with batons. I was kicked. I was left in a cell with no food and minimal water. They told me this would stop the moment I said the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. All I had to do was say those words, and the pain would end. Thought about it. In my weakness, exhausted and hurt, I genuinely considered giving up. But then I remembered grace. I remembered all my victims. I remembered that Jesus had died for me when I was still his enemy. And I realized that suffering for Jesus wasn't punishment, it was privilege. I was finally on the right side. I was finally suffering for truth instead of causing suffering for lies. After 5 days, international pressure led to my release. I was deported back to Malaysia, where I immediately went into hiding again because the charges there were still active. My 3rd assignment took me to Bangladesh. I worked with a team providing medical care to Christian families who'd fled persecution from Myanmar. We operated in secret, moving constantly, always aware that we could be discovered and killed at any moment. One evening our location was betrayed. Extremists attacked our camp. They came with weapons, shouting about killing the infidels and the traitors who helped them. We ran into the jungle. I was separated from my team. I spent 3 days alone in the forest, without food, terrified, hearing search parties looking for us. When I finally found my way to another village, I learned that 2 of our team members had been caught. They were beaten severely. One of them, a young man named David, died from his injuries. I attended his funeral in secret. His mother told me that David knew the risks but believed Jesus was worth dying for. She said he talked about me specifically, about how a former murderer had become a missionary, and how that gave him hope that Jesus could use anyone. Her words broke me. Killed people who were like David. I'd murdered believers who thought they were safe. And now I was surrounded by people who chose to die rather than deny Jesus, while I'd spent years killing to defend a false version of God. Each assignment brought new persecution. In Malaysia, I was nearly caught by my brothers 3 times. Once, I saw them searching a market where I'd gone to buy supplies. I hid in a shop for 4 hours, terrified, praying they wouldn't find me. In southern Philippines, I worked with Christians who lived under constant threat from Islamic militants. One village we served was attacked while I was there. Militants came through shooting, burning homes, looking specifically for Christians. We hid in a neighbor's basement for 18 hours while the attack continued above us. I could hear screaming, gunfire, the sounds of destruction. When we finally emerged, 7 believers had been killed, including 2 children. The worst beating I received happened in a village in Indonesia. Someone had informed the local imam that an apostate Muslim woman was treating Christians in the area. He organized a crowd to find me. They caught me as I was leaving a patient's home. They dragged me to the village center. The imam pronounced me guilty of apostasy and aiding enemies of Islam. Then the beating began. Men and women both participated. They used their fists, their feet, pieces of wood. They stripped off my outer clothes to humiliate me. They spit on me. They called me a whore, a traitor, a demon. Thought I would die. I genuinely believed this was the end. I remember praying, thanking Jesus for saving me, asking him to receive my spirit. I thought about grace, about Rebecca's forgiveness, about how I'd spent years persecuting believers and now was being persecuted for believing. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 or 20 minutes, other missionaries arrived with local police. The crowd dispersed. The missionaries carried me to safety. I spent 2 weeks recovering from my injuries. I lost hearing in my left ear from the beating. I still have scars on my back and arms. But even as I healed, I knew I would go back. Because I understood now what Jesus meant that night in my bedroom. He'd told me I would be persecuted for his sake. He'd told me I would share in the suffering of his people. And in some mysterious way, that suffering was healing me. Every beating I received felt like partial payment for the suffering I'd caused. Every night I spent in fear felt like justice for the fear I'd created. Every moment of persecution was a moment of participation in Christ's sufferings. And somehow in that participation, I found not just punishment but redemption. I'd spent years persecuting believers. Now I shared their persecution. And in that sharing, I understood grace in a way I never could have otherwise. 3 years passed. 3 years of running, hiding, serving, suffering. 3 years of treating patients while looking over my shoulder. 3 years of learning that following Jesus costs everything and is worth everything. Then one day, I received a message through a secure channel. It came from a Muslim nurse at my old hospital in Kuala Lumpur, a woman named Farah who'd been part of our killing network. The message was short. I can't do this anymore. I saw what happened to you. I've been thinking about what you said about Jesus. I've watched 2 more Christian patients die under my care this week, and I can't sleep. Can we talk? Please. I read that message and wept. Not just tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs of grief and hope and astonishment, because I realized what was happening. The horror I'd lived through, the monster I'd been, the suffering I now endured, none of it was wasted. Jesus was taking the worst thing I'd ever done and transforming it into my most powerful testimony. My story, as dark as it was becoming a beacon for others trapped in the same darkness I'd escaped. I arranged a secret meeting with Farah. She was terrified, looking over her shoulder constantly. She told me she'd killed 14 people. She said every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces. She said she'd tried to pray to Allah for peace but found only emptiness. I shared my testimony with her. I told her everything. The murders, the meeting with Jesus, Grace's death, Rebecca's forgiveness, my conversion, the persecution I now faced. I showed her my scars. I told her that following Jesus had cost me everything but given me something I never had as a Muslim: peace. Not the absence of struggle, but peace in the midst of struggle. Not the absence of guilt, but forgiveness for guilt. Not the absence of fear, but courage despite fear. Farah asked me if I really believed Jesus could forgive someone like her. I told her I was living proof. If Jesus could forgive me after 40+ murders, he could forgive anyone. That night, in a small hidden room, Farah accepted Christ. I baptized her in a bucket of water, both of us crying, both of us aware that her life would now be in danger just like mine. The last I heard, Farah is still alive, still serving Jesus, still facing persecution. She's been disowned by her family. She's lost her medical license after confessing her crimes. She's been beaten multiple times. But she tells me she's never been freer. I'm still running, still hiding, still serving in dangerous places. I know my brothers are still looking for me. I know the warrant for my arrest is still active. I know that any day could be the day I'm caught, imprisoned or killed. But I also know that Jesus is with me. I know that every person I help treat, every believer I encourage, every convert I baptize is a miracle of grace. I know that the murderer I was is being transformed into a servant of life. Carry my guilt every day. I still have nightmares about my victims. I still see Grace's face. I still hear Rebecca's screams. I don't think that will ever go away, and maybe it shouldn't. Maybe remembering is part of my redemption. But I also know this: Jesus doesn't waste our worst moments. He redeems them. He takes our greatest sins and transforms them into our most powerful testimonies. He takes our darkest nights and turns them into dawn. I was a doctor who became death. Now I'm learning to be a servant who brings life. And if Jesus can do that with me, he can do it with anyone. My brothers and sisters around the world, I want to speak directly to you now. If you're listening to this story, you need to understand something crucial. Right now, at this very moment, there are believers suffering persecution for their faith in ways you cannot imagine. They're being beaten. They're being imprisoned. They're being killed. Some by people like I used to be. People who genuinely believe they're serving God by destroying Christians. Please pray for them. Pray for believers in Muslim-majority countries who face death for their faith. Pray for converts from Islam who, like me, have become targets of their own families. Pray for missionaries working in dangerous places. Pray for Christians in North Korea, China, Nigeria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan, and dozens of other nations where following Jesus means risking everything. Your prayers matter. They really do. When I was being beaten in that Indonesian village, when I was hiding in that Malaysian market, when I was terrified and alone, believers around the world were praying. I know because I felt it. I felt sustained by prayers from people I'd never met. People who knew nothing about me except that I was a sister in Christ who needed help. So please pray. Pray regularly. Pray specifically. Pray boldly. Ask God to protect his people. Ask him to give them courage. Ask him to turn their persecution into powerful testimonies that draw others to faith. And if you're reading this and you're not yet a believer, if you've never accepted Christ, if you've been running from Jesus or rejecting him or simply ignoring him, please listen to me. I was the worst of sinners. I was a murderer who killed in God's name. I was so deceived that I thought my evil was righteousness. I was so far from God that I celebrated death and called it holy. And Jesus saved me. If he can save me, he can save you. Whatever you've done, whatever darkness you're trapped in, whatever guilt you carry, Jesus can handle it. His grace is bigger than your sin. His love is stronger than your hatred. His forgiveness is deeper than your guilt. I want to lead you in a simple prayer. If you want to accept Jesus, if you want to be forgiven, if you want to know the peace I've found, you can pray this prayer right now. You don't have to clean yourself up first. You don't have to be good enough. You just have to be honest and willing. Pray this with me. Jesus, I know I'm a sinner. I know I've done wrong things. I know I deserve punishment for my sins. But I believe you died on the cross to take my punishment. I believe you rose from the dead. I believe you're offering me forgiveness right now. Please forgive me. Please save me. Please come into my life and make me new. I give you my life, all of it, even the broken parts. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for dying for me. Thank you for accepting me just as I am. I'm yours now. In your name I pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer and meant it, you're now my brother or sister in Christ. Welcome to the family. Your journey with Jesus has begun. But I need to be honest with you about something. Following Jesus may cost you everything. It might cost you your family. It might cost you your safety. It might cost you your reputation, your career, your comfort. It might even cost you your life. But Jesus is worth it. I promise you he's worth it. I lost everything. But I gained Jesus. And he's been more than enough. Whatever persecution you face, whatever suffering comes, whatever price you pay, Jesus will be with you. He will sustain you. He will give you strength you didn't know you had. He will transform your suffering into something beautiful. So stand firm. Be brave. Don't be ashamed of Jesus. He was never ashamed of you. And remember, if a murderer like me can be saved, redeemed, and used by God, then there's hope for absolutely everyone. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for praying. Thank you for being part of this global family of believers who love Jesus more than life itself. May God bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. May he give you peace, even in the midst of the storm. In Jesus' name.